Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
I'm Ben Matlock.
And we're here. We haven't succumbed to the plague yet.
I don't know. You might have. I know your throat was feeling like shit, and then after I heard that, I heard that in Ohio, they estimate like 100,000 people have the fucking coronavirus.
I wouldn't surprise me, yeah.
So...
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it would be. I'm like the farthest thing from a like hypochondriac, alarmist, whatever.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, mine, I'm pretty sure is either tonsillitis or strep or even mono. I've had mono before, and I know that can come back because it's literally just like you have the big white spot on your throat that's gross and it hurts like a bitch. Like it's hard to swallow solid food.
Yeah.
But that's literally it. Like you can tell, my voice isn't affected, so it's not down to my like larynx or whatever.
But that's the thing when cases are mild is like a lot of people, that's as far as it goes, is just, maybe a symptom or two. The problem is like we can't fucking actually figure it out or get a read on it because so many places now are like, well, we can only test you if you're confirmed to have already like been in contact with somebody who we already confirmed had it.
And you have to be showing like 5 of the 6 symptoms. So if you have 1 or 2, they're like, oh, we're not running the test.
Like there are people like bedridden who can't get tested for it, but it's like they almost definitely have it. When I got super sick, like back at like near the tail end of January or whatever, I've just been telling myself that was it. And now, like, I was case 0, and now I'm done. And now, like, I have no way of knowing if that's true or not because we don't actually know how long it's been here.
Though, given like how sick you got, like,
yeah,
I remember because that was before all this really hit, and it was like, man, that was a hell of a bug you got. But
yeah, like, because I've had the flu and it never hit me that hard. But it is just sort of like more comforting to just operate my life as if, well, thank God I survived it.
I already had it. I'm immune. Yeah.
If anything, it made me stronger.
I don't think that's what mine is. I mean, it could be, but it's just a sore throat, no fever, no like nasal stuff. It's weird. Like
well, you're a real trooper for showing up today, because I would have found any excuse to be like, well, I'm gonna just stay in my pajamas, and watch more movies or something. But we're here.
It's interesting. I can't say anything because you're in Washington, and that's like ground zero for it, but Ohio's,
California's a little bit worse. But yeah,
well, I think you guys were the most proactive though in starting to like shut stuff down from what I saw. I don't know.
Well, we kind of had to be because we were like, I didn't know this until this shit showed up, but like Washington's one of the few places with like the research labs equipped to actually look into this. So people just started sending us their cases. And because we're the only ones who can really deal with it. So in some ways that's, it's like we have to do it. But in a lot of ways that's like really disheartening that like we're the only ones who can like bring these people in and actually like try to treat them. But anyway, it's okay because nobody knows anything and nobody knows what we're going to do about it. So we're all in a good place.
Yeah.
In the meantime, listen to this lovely show, and we'll hold hands as we, ride that fucking bomb to oblivion.
Yeah. See, there's 2 schools of thoughts on this because a lot of people are scared or concerned or depressed or whatever, and even if you're none of the above, if you're in one of the areas where you're supposed to like isolate and stay indoors, you're probably bored because this is the time of the year where like it's starting to get nice, and you're like, I don't want to like stay inside. I've been inside all winter. So there's 2 schools of thought. One, there's a lot of people passing a lot of like positive vibes around and like, oh, here, here's kitten pictures or this or that. Or you can just like really double down into that depressed mood and like listen to our show because we're not going to cheer you up.
That's where I'm at. Like, I mean,
that's
combine this with like the election shit. I'm ready to fucking blow my brains out. Like this is... And I'm the kind of person, I know you are, a lot of people are, I think, where you get in those moods where you're just not in a great, like, just things haven't been going right, and people are like, well, here's something cheery. I don't want that shit. That just makes me more angry. I was actually thinking about this with, like, music, where I'm like, why do I listen, like, so much of my favorite music, especially these days, makes me upset. Like, it makes me angry, it makes me sad. but it's what I want to listen to. And it's like, God, humans are fucking stupid, and we gravitate to what makes us miserable.
Sing a song about it. Yeah.
But,
So that's what we got. And it sounds like, you kind of hinted to me about what you had. It sounds like we're going to be squarely in that ballpark.
You know what? Today is not like the, I would actually say it's not even, in the top 50 most depressing things I talked about. This is more just like a very people who meant well, but it didn't quite pan out type stories, which are also par for the course with this show. So, the culture in America, once we entered World War II, was, as you would expect, pretty aggressively patriotic. 16 million Americans were serving in the military alone, not to mention the millions contributing to the war effort at home. So you would go, just going out around town, movies, radio shows, they were just constantly pushing citizens, join the fight, in whatever capacity you could. When you look back at the war now, it's almost hard to believe that anybody would, be standoffish about, that conflict. Because, we look at World War II as a pretty black and white war now. So imagine how they felt about it back then, when it was still fresh in their heads. Not to say that it was completely black and white, but it was sort of the last war America was involved in where there was a true moral antagonist.
Yeah, it was pretty clear that we were on the correct side of that conflict.
And then our conflicts after that, it's maybe they're bad people, but we're also pretty fucking bad too.
Well, yeah, and I would interject to say the difference is World War II and World War I, of course. Like you said, the World War II was the last one where it was us against clear, just evil, fighting for humanity. Every other war, like you said, is just they're bad, but we're going to actually fight this war because we want their land or oil or whatever.
Right, but at least that's the popular narrative. There's still a lot of gray areas of World War II. One was that, whole dropping a fucking nuclear bomb on an entire population. Where the waters got muddied for America, probably right around there. But anyway, so, it was a pretty black and white conflict, but there were still 44,000 men who were registered as conscientious objectors. These men were publicly shamed. They were called slackers, jellyfish, and worms. And had this
That's not really that bad. And I love that insults back then were so they're Will Smith rap insults.
Yeah, I feel like being called jellyfish would eat at me though. It wouldn't hurt immediately, but a few days later I'd be like, fuck them. And had this been the First World War, they would have gone to jail if they didn't fight. But after World War I, new draft laws allowed these men to opt in for non-combat services. Often these people became medics or worked the civilian public service where they would work on farms, trails, or just helping to tend hospital patients. But given the context of that war and just the environment around them, you had to be pretty fucking committed to pacifism, and the men we're talking about today certainly were. But despite their ironclad principle to not kill another person, they wanted to contribute to the fight in some way, even if it meant painful sacrifice, and in this case it certainly did. So in November of 1944, 36 men entered the Laboratory of Physiological Hygiene at the University of Minnesota for an experiment. They all received a brochure that said, "Would you starve that others might be fed?" In the 1940s, there was not actually much known about hunger except that, it sucked. Which is actually one of the silliest things I think I've ever had to write down for the show, because a lot of people knew about hunger over the entire course of humanity, and those people are called homeless, and you would have just had to ask them what it's like.
Right, it's not like nobody ever starved to death prior to 1942 or whatever you just said,
But I get what the Minnesota starvation experiment was going for, to some extent. They wanted to see the effects of a relatively healthy individual go through the conditions of a famine, and how you would approach a famine recovery, which everybody was correctly expecting to happen after this war, is that resources would be devastatingly low. Not to mention all the people, who are starving and, dying in the Holocaust. So the experiment was headed by a man named Ancel Keys, who he's the guy who developed the famous K ration for soldiers, which is a nifty pocket-sized meal that I only know about from playing Metal Gear Solid because real war frightens me. So the experiment began with stage 1, standardization. So this was 12 weeks where the men all ate the same food, about 3,500 calories a day, which is a lot of fucking calories compared to what I eat in a day.
Yeah. Now they say like the average. It's funny because I've, being somebody that's overweight and has tried in vain to get in shape, mostly because I like to eat, that doesn't work. But anyway, you look at all these things and it's like, oh, there's these calculators like what's your height and what's your ideal weight and blah, blah, blah. And here's how many. But it seems like for men, it's always like 2,500 calories. It doesn't matter what numbers you plug in there. And then women, it's...
Every test I've took is like 2,000. So I just
ballpark 2,000 for like weight loss and 25 for maintaining.
Well, it depends on your build and stuff too. Yeah. So for like weight loss for me, I have to be like under 1,800. At least last time I checked. It's been a few years. But it's still 3,500 is a lot for, from where I'm coming from. So they slept in a dormitory in the upstairs of the lab. They would eat in the cafeteria with the University of Minnesota football team. They were constantly getting tested physically and psychologically. It was pretty extensive work that went into monitoring them. They would check their mood, they would check blood pressure, they checked their sperm count just to, see where everybody was at.
That was everybody's favorite day.
Yeah, hell yeah, dude. The men also had to walk 22 miles a week and work for 15 hours. And then stage 2 starts, starvation. So after the first 12 weeks, a 24-week period starts where meals weren't just gradually cut down, but their calorie intake was dramatically cut in half. This was to represent the sort of rationing you would have to do once a famine kicked in and you had to cut your resources like that. Each man went from 3 meals a day to 2, and if they didn't lose 25% of their body weight, they would lose more food until they did. What they...
Yeah, so it is intentionally like even if it's like, oh, your body's built to handle this, well, screw you. We're going to keep.
Yeah, what if it got worse, huh? What they was true to what the under siege European diet would look like, which was just a fuck ton of cabbage, potatoes, and wheat bread. But when you're fucking hungry, that's good enough. As one participant, Jay Garner, said, "We not only cleaned our plates, we licked them, talked about food, thought about food. Some people collected as many as 25 or 30 cookbooks," which is, probably a pretty dangerous approach to, a hunger experiment is to just dwell on how fucking hungry you are.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Some people's brains are like that, but it kind of reminds me of a completely different context. But like when I was in like high school or whatever, and I'd be around the house bored, my mom would always be like, "Well, why don't you go to like the mall and just look?" And I'd be like, "I don't have any money." She's like, "Well, you could just look at stuff." It's like, why the fuck would I do that?
Insane,
it's like,
yeah.
Right. But some people, like, she likes to do that. It's like, I don't want to look at stuff that I want but can't have.
Right. But for these guys, and it's kind of a reoccurring thing throughout their experiment, a lot of them, there were a couple of guys who wanted to, distract themselves, but a lot of them just like, there was this weird fucking fixation on food that they didn't even bother trying to fight. In the sense that, like, they would, just dwell on the food they can't have. And that's pretty much what they thought about for 24 hours.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So as the men lost weight, they lost their libido and really any interest in, dating. They also lost a lot of strength or really any ability to concentrate. Their heads were just fixated on fucking food.
I'm kind of starting to think that I'm starving.
Yeah. And again, I feel like you could have asked any poor people about this shit centuries before 1940 to learn about this particular effect being hungry has. But it's an experiment, so we'll keep going along with it. Another participant, Henry Skolberg, remembers being on a date, and on the way home he told the girl, if we're attacked by a bunch of ruffians, run like hell because I'm too weak to do anything to help you, which is the first thing I put on a dating profile.
Well, was that a common problem back then? Like,
I'm sure
just gangs of ruffians roaming the street?
1940s America, I feel like people lived as if there were ruffians around every corner. They don't, like, ruffians probably didn't even mean like a gang of people. They probably saw ruffians like a fucking Pokemon or something that would come at you.
There's a squirrel, run. I can't fight it off.
But I feel like that would be a good, that's a good line for a date. It's just like, and by the way, if anything does go down, run, because I'm useless. Garner even said his weakness got to the point where he couldn't even open the library doors on campus. He had to just like do that move where you kind of hang out by the doors, and when somebody goes in, you casually slide in behind them.
Yeah, but the problem was he lost so much weight when they opened the doors, the draft like pushed him
Blew
away.
him
like
away.
Yeah.
He just flies away.
No.
So, a lot of these quotes and stuff came 50 years after the experiment, and the men involved were still shocked by how much the starvation had kind of a permanent effect on their thoughts and emotions. Like, many of them described themselves as, outgoing people at the beginning, but starvation really kind of shut them down and made them introverted and just kind of less concerned with, like, the world around them. And maybe I would say part of that's just getting old and maybe not an effect of the experiment. But, it's still, if you've ever even been kind of hungry, your mood kind of shifts and you're like a little more like.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a reason
there's an urgent.
All those commercials, yeah.
Yeah. So there was one individual who used his time in this experiment to kind of keep his mind off of thinking about food, and his name was Max Campbellman. Everybody was encouraged to keep taking classes and stuff, but he actually finished law school and began to pursue a graduate degree in political science while all this was going down.
Because they wanted to sue the shit out of these people. It's like...
But he actually went on to, be like an arms official for like 2 other presidents, and he actually had a real like true to the like just real true pacifism beliefs about how love needs to be able to conquer evil, and that's how we need to operate our lives. And he felt that way right up until we dropped the bomb on Japan, and then realized like we'll never stop evil.
I quit.
But he's a pretty interesting guy. I'm sure you could probably tell just his life story alone would be worthy of a show, but it would be too positive for me to talk about. So in May 1945, victory was declared in Europe, but the war was continuing with Japan. The starvation experiment participants were halfway through the starvation phase as they ran on treadmills until they collapsed and tried to continue doing their usual jobs and just deal with the daily fixation on how fucking hungry they were. Like they kind of developed this weird hobby of like going out and just watching people eat. So like,
God, how weird would that be? Like you're on a date with your gal. I think that's how they'd say it back then. And you two are just eating dinner and talking, and you look over, and there's just a group of like 12 guys just staring.
30 men at the bar drinking coffee and staring at you urgently. Yeah.
Don't stop chewing, Buster.
Jay Garner says, like, we would go into a restaurant and order just a cup of coffee and watch other people eat, and it would bother us when people would only eat half their food and leave the other half, which I understand, but...
But they couldn't fight them because they were too weak. So.
You're right. And you know how often I would leave one bite on the table just to torture them?
Yeah, if you found out. But the whole time you're eating, you got to go,
man, I'm stuffed.
This is so good.
Cannot eat another bite. So they could drink coffee and tea, and for a while they could chew gum at their leisure. until Keys and the other scientists realized gum had a few calories of sugar in it and realized they had to ration that too to 2 packs a day, which for us is still a lot of gum, but for them it's like they were relying on that shit.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, because like we wouldn't notice the calories because there's not. Although that is one of the things, like when you're looking at dieting stuff, they're like no gum because there's sugar in it. It's like really, like
yeah.
If a piece of gum is going to make me fat, then I just quit because. But yeah, if you're trying to starve somebody, that then your body picks up on, hey, these are the only calories I'm getting.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be shocked to learn that they were like swallowing the gum, like eating it.
Yeah, I'm sure that was happening too. So behavior around food got substantially more weird as this went on. One man just fucking jacked a bunch of potatoes, carrots, and onions from a store and just started stuffing himself. So he shoplifted just to eat more of the shit he was already regulated to eat. Like,
yeah, that's true. Like, you could steal anything. Why?
But he went like just for more roots and shit. That man was dropped from the experiment. Obviously, he kind of fucked it up. And 3 others were dropped either because they didn't lose weight like the others were doing, or because they cheated on the terms of the experiment.
The ones that like didn't lose weight, wouldn't they be the ones you want to keep in to try to figure out like how they're different from? That
was what I was thinking. Because if this is an experiment, it's all about data, So
well,
why?
Right. It seems like the important question would be like, how are we sustain our troops on limited rations if they get pinned down or this or that? Like those would be what you want, but they're like, no, you're not being tortured enough. Get out.
Well, like data should account for like variations. And dropping people because they're not losing enough weight, then it's like, okay, well, you only have one, like, sort of controlled group here, and you're not accounting for, like, the massive amount of people who will be in a famine. So it's like, you know what, like, I get they're trying to simplify it a little bit, but it was still, like, it was weird to read that. In late July, the starvation side of the experiment ended. At this point, as you imagine, the men's rib cages and bones were pressed to their skin, and the men were just, tired and relieved that the rehabilitation phase could start. And it would actually end up being the hardest phase for them to go through. Because imagine, like, you're coming off a period where you didn't get to eat really fucking anything, and now these scientists are going to gradually and slowly reintroduce a limited calorie increase back into your system. So you're basically finding out that you got to feel like shit for like another 3 months at least.
That's the problem. Yeah, because in your head you probably build it up like as soon as we hit this date, it'll be back to normal. And I get why you can't. That seems very dangerous to go from. But
yeah,
so, that mentally though, that would be that's when you'd lose me. I'd be in a padded cell just rocking back and forth like.
So morale was not high. It was at this time that one participant named Sam Legg went to visit a friend for dinner, or a few friends for dinner at their home in Minneapolis. He had his own pre-measured food from the lab, and everything seemed fine as the group enjoyed the warm, glowing fireplace on a cool summer night. As the fire was getting low, and Sam decided to jump up, go out to where the wood pile was, and split some more wood for it. This was 3 weeks into the rehabilitation phase, and Sam weighed about 113 pounds, and he was so weak he could barely lift the hatchet that was by the woodpile, but he found a way just to cut off 3 fingers.
Wow.
Sam Lake says, I admit to being crazy mixed up at the time. As of 50 years later, I'm not ready to say I did it on purpose. I'm not ready to say I didn't. So he totally did it on purpose.
Yeah.
The experiment staff psychologist said Legg's mental state was in sharp decline. When he was at the hospital, he tried to explain that he did it because he was just so hungry. A young worker at the hospital thought that he meant that he was like trying to eat his fingers, but that wasn't like the motivation there. It's just when you're that fucking hungry for that long, there isn't really a logical motivation for this or a lot of the impulses you're going to feel when you're like just starved,
Right.
The best you can say is like maybe he did it to like take his mind off of it, but I don't think it was even that thought out.
Yeah, I mean, That's the thing is, whatever his motivation is, I think is probably going to be a subconscious motivation where it's like, I want to feel something other than pain or hunger. I mean, or maybe he didn't do it on purpose. I mean, your mind is so out there that your hand could just be there. Like you don't realize what you don't like. You go out and you just pick up a hatchet and you think, gotta chop something, and your hand's laying there and you chop. I could see that being the case. I mean,
right.
Who knows?
So scientists called it a case of semi-starvation neurosis. But as badly as Sam Lake wanted to end this shit, he hated the idea of failing the experiment even more. So, sewn up hand and all, Sam Lake went back and finished. Japan surrendered in September of that year, and this was announced while the men were eating, and no one at the table gave a fuck. They just kept eating.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, at this point, they're in their own personal war. They don't... Yeah.
It's funny you say that because, like, the guys, when they're interviewed about it, it's like, yeah, we have a ton of respect for the people who actually went over and fought, and yeah, we weren't being shot at, but it felt like a fucking battlefield in our mind, talking about going through this shit.
Yeah, and that's a shame because I bet you, talking to anybody that actually fought over there, they continued to treat them like crap for
being pacifists. Yeah. Well, I said, this is kind of a story of meaning well, but not really working out. When the experiment started, Garner weighed 165 pounds. By the end, he weighed 119, and other men had similar dramatic drops in weight. Now it was over, and the men got to eat whatever they wanted, so naturally a lot of them just went and fucking binged so much that they had to go to the hospital. Others claimed no matter how much they ate, it didn't seem to make them full or take their mind off of food. It just didn't fill their stomach anymore. Similar things were kind of observed from concentration camp survivors, where it was just like, yeah, they were getting weight back, but they still felt like they were starving.
Right.
Unfortunately, while we did learn a lot from the Minnesota experiment in some ways, it was really put in place to prepare with dealing with a famine-stricken country after the war. And the study wouldn't get published until 1950, 5 years after the war ended, and the battle against post-war hunger had already pretty much been fought. So it was much to the disappointment of the participants and the scientists. We went through this experiment about hunger while everyone dealt with hunger.
That's the best thing about these awful experiments is that it seems half the time you don't learn anything. Well, like you said, they did learn important stuff, but they didn't really come into play, right. At least not here.
Yeah. So what it did show us was kind of noteworthy information, however, which is that, like, when people are starving, they need raw calories more than they need, like, a complex mixture of vitamins and proteins. As obvious as the conclusion is, hungry people need a lot of food to not be hungry anymore. And there's not really, like, a, gym fitness cocktail to give them to, bring that back. It's you got to give them calories. But the details that went into the men's mood and bodies still make Ancel Keys' experiment something that is regularly cited to this day when researchers are talking about eating disorders. But it was also an experiment that could never be done again. Once people realized the horrors of what Nazi doctors had conducted on people, ethics for human experimentation went through a complete overhaul, and the Minnesota starvation experiment would have been a complete violation of all those ethics had it not occurred before then.
I like the discovery is basically, wait, we were doing the exact same thing Nazis were doing? Let's examine this. This might be bad.
Yeah, I mean, they probably did a little bit better to keep people in a healthy enough range.
I mean, some of the stuff that
because Nazi experiments, they didn't give a fuck, and they didn't even look at them as people.
Well, no, they were literally doing things like, let's sew a monkey arm to a human brain while the guy's alive, just to see what happens.
Yeah.
It's like, they died of infection. Weird. Okay.
But again, it's a fucking huge research text about this experiment, but the conclusion is just so obvious. Like I said, you could have fucking talked to anyone poor.
There's some interesting stuff about it, though. I actually just came across this experiment. I kind of heard about it on over the years, but just recently in an article, kind of in one of those articles that is getting on all these like diet crazes, like Weight Watchers and shit, because most of those are pretty horrible. But one of the things that specifically that this experiment found is that the starvation threshold, like some of these participants were starting to show these signs of starvation as far as diminished abilities, like nowhere near to where it got, but you were already starting to see it when they were down to like 2,000 calories, which we were just talking about. It's like a lot of diets say, hey, if you want to lose weight, 2,000, 18, even, I've had them tell me 1,500 calories a day, but according to some of the results from this says, well, if you do that, you're going to have some of these, like I said, not to the point that you're going to restaurants to watch people eat or chopping off your fingers, but you do have diminished mental abilities and physical abilities and whatnot. So that was interesting. It did kind of help establish, but I don't think it did. It was too small of a group to, like, is it really you hit this mark and that's when people are going to have these, or is it because they fed them 3,500 calories? Is it less about the number of calories and more about the percentage of what your body has? Yeah, right. So I don't know. There's a lot of interesting things about it, but
kind of like what we talked about last week. It's like these kind of flawed experiment ideas, but you still get information about them. But it's also kind of that it's like, yeah, this was informative, but did the information, trump kind of the moral grounds we were treading on? Like,
yeah, well, and that's the problem too, is that both of the experiment last week and this week, especially the one this week, I think could have resulted in a lot better data if you could do follow-up tests to test some of these other stuff, but you can't ethically. And again, like we said, I don't disagree with that, but it kind of makes it tough because it's like, well, we've got an idea of where we're going, but now how are we going to test this?
Yeah, it's
on animals, I guess, but because it's okay to be cruel to those.
Well, I mean, that's also a really tough one because we're talking about like, well, this experiment could have been more effective. Most of like our modern advances in science came from some pretty cruel shit we did to animals. And that's something that, we kind of have to live with, is just like the reality.
Balance,
like we don't, it's shitty to say now because we don't even have access to our own modern medicine. But advancements in modern medicine would have been impossible if we weren't testing shit out. But
yeah, and I'm certainly not here to. I'm not going to say, if animal testing should never be done, or it's okay to be done. In fact, it's kind of one of those things in my own mind that I haven't really come to terms with because it's awful, but it's necessary. It's like, okay, well,
yeah. It's just sort of the reality of humanity on this planet is. We use the resources around us, even if those resources are living things. And I think kind of the best you can hope for is that you use those things in a way that are, worthy of that sacrifice. I say as I eat a Wendy's cheeseburger or some shit. But you hope it's better than that. Yeah. But a lot of times it's not, and, So yeah, you fucking called it at the beginning of the show, man. Like, it's the most depressing note I think we've ended the show on for me. And like, we've talked about serial killers and shit, but now I'm just like, man, humanity's a parasite.
Yeah. In fact, I think there is no, that's not what that movie was about. Well,
it was a little bit, yeah. In a lot of ways, yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, that would have been a tough experiment for me to go through because I like my food. Well, it's funny because I always say I like my food. I do. We've talked about it. I like to cook. I cook fancy stuff. I like food. I like to study food and like the science of food and this and that. But I'm not like, I don't go to Golden Corral and eat 13 plates in a sitting because that's not whatever. But man,
the thing is, like,
one way to get me in a bad mood is to withhold food from me.
Yeah. I think what would have driven me more nuts is the diet, though. The way of just like, well, when you can't eat, here's a fucking potato. And I'm going to be like, I'm going to fucking kill you. Give me a stick of butter for this potato before I kill you. But But yeah, it would have been tough.
Well, you can't. You can. What about some butter flavored gum? But only one pack.
Right. That sounds like some shit Homer would chew on The Simpsons. Butter gum.
I was talking a couple weeks ago on Twitter about mayonnaise gum. People did not react kindly to that tweet.
It's fucking it's disgusting. And I don't hate mayonnaise, but the fuck you. I don't want that shit hanging around.
Yeah, I mean it would be. That's why I tweeted it, because it's funny to me.
Because you're a goddamn problem. I should have never given you a Twitter account.
What did I call them? Condiments. You know, it's like double mint gum. You got
that's disgusting. Now I'm imagining like fucking spearmint infused mayo gum.
Here's my like Shark Tank pitch on this. It's like, how many times have you had gum? But then you go to eat something, you're like, well, shit, I've got to spit out my gum so I can eat this burger. Well, if you have mayonnaise flavored gum, you can go ahead and eat that burger, but keep your gum.
It'll feel like you just had a fucking spoon of mayonnaise in your mouth, and now you're trying to wash it out with a burger.
Right, like, which seems okay.
No, you could just not have the fucking taste of mayo. Like I've never had gum in my mouth and been like, oh fuck, my burger's ruined. It's like one bite, and all the flavors take over. It's fine.
What? It's really the opposite for me. Like, I hate when I have a meal and like it was a really good flavor, and then you're like, oh, but I need a piece of gum. But then the gum just gets rid of like. I mean, that's the point of it, but it's like, well, now my mouth tastes like mint, and I don't like mint. I want my burger back.
It sounds like you just want gum that tastes like a cheeseburger. Like, I don't know why it has to be mayo.
Well, you get one of each. You put a piece of mayo in and a beef gum and, you know, whatever. That way you can build your own.
You could do like burger. A cool packaging thing where there's a picture of a burger and then each place you pull out is a different ingredient. Flavor of gum.
You gotta shove that whole fucking pack in your mouth to get a burger flavor.
That would be the cruelest product to give these guys for the fucking hunger experiment. It's like, well, you can't have a burger, but here's a pack of gum that looks like a burger. And it's up to you if you want to eat it all at once or do one bit of it at a time.
Man, we would have been such good psychologists back then.
Yeah. If we didn't have to fucking care about keeping people healthy, that would have been our prime time to be a doctor.
We would have turned into the best episode of Non-Essential Podcast because it would be such a bad experiment that the people would rise up and murder us.
Two fucking chuckle fuck doctors who had no idea what they were doing and were just being cruel. We're mobbed by an entire town today.
And they find our corpses nailed to the wall.
But burger gum took off anyway. But anyway, that's our story this week. We hope you enjoyed. We hope you stay healthy. You know, if you can't stay healthy, it's probably impossible at this point.
Yeah,
but get some
stay
rest.
Away from people or just start licking people, whichever. I don't know.
Yeah. Shoot some spit into a super soaker and start firing at your neighbors. Because if you're going down, take the world with you, right? Yeah. But yeah, assuming that, you know, the world hasn't ended, we'll be back next week.
Oodaloo.